Hello, my name is Dr. MarkAlain Dery, and I am the Medical Director of Infectious Diseases and Chief Innovation Officer for Access Health Louisiana. I live in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I serve as co-chair for the ACOI Infectious Diseases Subspecialty Section. Now, you've seen me do these updates now for the past few months, and in conjunction with the leadership of the ACOI, I hope these messages are helping you keep up with the latest on COVID-19. Now, I know many of you are in the thick of the fight, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of all of us who daily focus on infectious diseases and certainly on behalf of the ACOI. So, moving together with the ACOI, we will continue to share information as it becomes available, as well as some of the hopeful progresses that we're seeing as well, of which we have some today. All right, now speaking of the ACOI, are you registered for the virtual convention? If you aren't, do it today. There's an opportunity to save $50 by registering before September 21st. The clock's ticking, y'all gotta go. So don't miss that chance. The virtual convention will be like nothing else that has been experienced virtually. They are pulling out all of the stops to make this a very cool event. Plus, with sessions from so many of our members, you won't want to miss it. I think that there's no better way or less stressful way to get your CME credits this year. And I look forward to seeing you there. Okay, so on to the stories. So, all right, this one. This is the Bradykinin hypothesis. I just want to be very, very clear. This is like me doing, right? Like, I don't know, but it sounds really interesting. It was a fascinating story. Please click on the references. Please read the article. It's a really interesting theory as to what's happening. Again, it may not amount to anything, but I think it's super, super cool. So we wanted to include it today. All right. So have you been wondering what challenges the nation's supercomputer at Oak Ridge National Lab in Tennessee and what the computer has been trying to solve? Well, if you knew there was one of them to begin with, I'm impressed. I had no idea. So it turns out that this behemoth machine is part of the COVID-19 fight. Who knew? All right. In an effort to better understand COVID-19, the researchers put the Summit supercomputer, which is the second fastest computer in the world, which also makes me think, how do they measure that sort of stuff? But whatever. Second fastest computer in the world. And by the way, and they put it to the test. So it crunched data on more than 40,000 genes from 17,000 genetic samples. And even being as fast as it is, it still took well over a week for the researchers to get the results. Okay, so what caught my attention was how the lead researcher in the study summarized the findings. He called it his eureka moment, right? I'm still waiting for that one for me. He called it his eureka moment, and, which revealed a potential new theory on how COVID-19 impacts the body. Now, we know the virus enters the body through ACE2 receptors in the nose and the nasopharynx and the oropharynx as well. We've talked about that several times here on this vlog. But as it begins entering other cells where there are also ACE2 receptors, like in the heart and the kidneys and the intestines, and given how widespread this virus is, it certainly makes sense. I mean, we've heard about the disease's cardiac and GI symptoms. So the virus actually hijacks the body's own symptoms, and it tricks it into upregulating ACE2 receptors in place where they're usually expressed at low or medium levels, including the lungs. Think of it like a burglar who comes into your home, ransacks it, then also opens the windows and the doors to your home, allowing others to come in and pillage as well. Not good. So this leads to this so-called Bradykinin storm, right? A Bradykinin storm. So now this is why potentially that COVID-19 may be so deadly. With the buildup of bradykinin, blood vessels become leaky and affect the lungs, which can make them more susceptible to being filled with fluid. It also increases hyaluronic acid, which then forms this like jello-like substance called hydrogel, and it can fill the lungs, and it can also make it nearly impossible to breathe. And this is why sometimes ventilators are not always successful with those that are severely ill. Now, it could also affect the heart as well. 1 in 5 patients have damage to their hearts, including those that never had cardiac issues previously. And this may be due to the ACE2 receptors in the heart and the renin-angiotensin syndrome, which controls blood pressure and other cardiac contractions. Now, the bradykinin hypothesis addresses how these storms, bradykinin, creates arrhythmias and potentially low blood pressure, which we've seen in patients with COVID-19. Now, the same hypothesis also accounts for these neurologic effects that we've seen as well, like seizures, strokes, delirium, dizziness, which up to half of COVID hospitalized patients experience. And that is hypothesized that it could be that the bradykinin can penetrate through the blood barrier, the brain barrier, the blood-brain barrier. My apologies. All right. So this theory also supports other things like that other patients experience, like loss of taste and smell, which we talked about, the so-called COVID toes, and it even has been shown to dysregulate the thyroid gland. In fact, Jacobson and his team, this is the primary author, and his team note in their paper that the virus acts pharmacologically as an ACE inhibitor, almost directly mirroring the actions of ACE inhibitors. And there are drugs like Danzanol, Stanzanol, and others that actually reduce bradykinin production and health consequences of the deadly storm that it creates. So it could be that there are medications that could potentially treat this. And vitamin D has emerged as potentially as an effective tool or medication in reducing the severity of bradykinin storms. So this, of course, seems like a pretty safe remedy. The benefit we see from bradykinin hypothesis is guiding treatments that could potentially reduce the suffering and potentially mortality associated with COVID-19. So all in all, again, this is an interesting, with all the news that's happening in COVID-19, we decided to kind of really do one of these and see kind of where we were headed in the big picture. And I found this to be a really interesting article. I know there's a lot of unknowns at this point, but I think that moving forward, I think that it will be interesting to see if this ends up being a potential valuable hypothesis. And if anything, if it is, the fact that there's medications that already treat bradykinin or are bradykinin inhibitors, that would be amazing. Okay, so speaking of treatments, let's go into one of the most amazing pieces of information that came out this week, and that was the this notion of very well-known steroids being helpful in reducing mortality for COVID-19. So just this week, the World Health Organization announced guidance on using steroids to treat severely COVID-19 patients. The Journal of the American Medical Association published a meta-analysis illustrating that several steroids are in fact or should now be considered the new standard of care. They looked at 7 randomized clinical trials that evaluated 3 steroids in over 1,700 patients, with the result that showed that each of the tested drugs reduced the risk of death in patients. That's amazing, right? Remdesivir doesn't do that. Remdesivir only shortens the hospital stay, whereas this actually reduced the likelihood of mortality. So the publication not only published the research paper, but also its related studies as well as referring to it as an important step in the treatment of patients with COVID-19. And it went on to say that corticosteroids now should be the first-line treatment for critically ill patients, not for outpatients, hospitalized, critically ill patients. So what were the drugs? So they were dexamethasone, hydrocortisone, and methylprednisolone. And these medications are typically used as anti-inflammatories, which is, of course, it suppresses or calms down the immune system, which, of course, will alleviate swelling and inflammation. Now, very important, considering that death from COVID-19 is often attributed to the body's immune system in that overdrive, and it's over responds to the virus as it fights, right? As what we were referring to previously as bradykinin, or that so-called cytokinin storm. So it could be that these steroids actually kind of dampen it down a bit. But of course, we know for every benefit we make, for every step forward, there's a step back. Steroids can also, of course, be harmful, especially in elderly patients. So they should also just be given to the sickest patient. But the most important outcome that needs to be stressed is that steroids were linked to a significant reduction in death. That's important. For up to 1/3 of those that were critically ill with COVID-19. Dexamethasone produced a 36% drop in mortality. Hydrocortisone reduced mortality by 31%, and methylprednisolone was attributed to a 9% drop. So, what do I think here? These are important steps forward, but I think more importantly, and this is my opinion only, I think that this was the WHO reaching out to low and middle income countries and encouraging them to use the steroids. One, because it's appropriate. The studies show, the meta-analysis shows that that's the way that it works. But also, I think probably more importantly is that a drug like remdesivir, which is expensive and it's a good medication, really only, again, reduces hospital stay, whereas these medications, these steroids, very, very are more important in the sense that they reduce mortality. So I think that's kind of what I take from these studies. And of course, there's so much to say about steroids in the ICU and with ARDS, ARDS. And that's a whole other ball of wax, and we'll save that for a different time. So with that being said, stay on the lookout for our regular updates, and to read more from the sources used in this report, go to the acoi.org/COVID-19. Together with the ACOI, we'll help you keep up on the latest information to help you respond to your patients and stay on top of the crisis. And please feel free to reach out to me anytime at madery@mac.com. Please stay safe. We can do this together.